everyone and welcome to this video. Welcome to my channel. My name is Claire. I make videos every week, so if that's something you're interested in, true crime, then please join me. I hope you enjoyed watching last week's video. It was so anger inducing, so infuriating. But yeah, if you like this kind of thing, go and watch that video, and I hope you enjoy this one. This story today is a really emotive one for me because it happened when I was 18 years old, which is a similar age to the victim in this case, and she associated with the kind of mosher goth scene, which I also did at that stage in my life. So yeah, when this happened, I remember thinking, you know, I was really upset and really confused to why this kind of senseless act of violence happened to somebody that was completely undeserving. So today I will be talking about the case of Sophie Lancaster, who died at the age of 20 years old. Who was Sophie Lancaster? Let's start by talking a bit about who she was before we got to how she ended up in that situation, that fateful evening. Sophie was born on the 26th of November 1986. She is a November baby, like myself. She was born in Lancaster, which is a county in the north of England. It's a lovely part of the world. Sophie grew up there as the youngest child in her family. As she started to grow up, she started to be drawn to that goth culture that was really popular around about that time. She developed her own style, and her family would describe her as, alternative. Sophie finished high school, and before she started Accrington and Rossdale College, where she was going to do a degree in English, she decided to take a gap year. It's really common for people her age to take a gap year where they go and travel or they go and work for a year before they start back into full-time education. A really fun thing to do. During this time, Sophie got herself a boyfriend called Robert Maltby. He is a huge part of this story as well today, so I will be talking about him throughout this video. They had been going out for 3 years, or they've been dating for 3 years, and were living together as well. Sophie's friends actually described them as soulmates. They had the same interests, they had a really wide friend circle, and on the evening of the 10th of August, it was a Friday night, they were at a friend's house socialising together. And they were having a couple of drinks, a nice fun Friday night for young people. So now we're on to that evening. So at 11:40 p.m, Sophie and Robert decided to leave the party and walk home, which is about a 2-mile walk home. Wasn't bad weather or anything, so they decided just to walk it. They decided to also take a wee slight diversion while walking home to go to a 24-hour garage where they were going to buy some cigarettes. While they were at the garage, there was some girls hanging around there, and they actually took an interest in Sophie and Robert because they looked a bit different. So they started chatting to them. They weren't being mean or anything. They were just chatting about Sophie's piercings, her hair colour, or dreadlocks that she had. Nothing bad. So they were just having a good laugh. And they all decided to go to the local park together. It was called the Stubby Lee Park, to all hang about together for a wee while. The 5 offenders in this story were already in the park, and they had already been drinking for hours. This part of the story moves really, really quickly because things seem to have escalated really quickly. So they're all hanging about the skate park area, having a good time. Robert and Sophie are having a good time with the girls that they met at the garage. And the boys that were hanging about the park evidently just took a disliking to Robert. For no rhyme or reason, they just took a disliking to him, probably because he actually looked slightly different to them. and there were shouts, you know, calls from the group of guys saying hit him, you know, just really intimidating things. The first boy to initiate the violence that evening was Brendan Harris. He was 15 years old at the point of this crime, and he stepped forward and punched Robert Maitland in the face. This knocked Robert straight to the ground. Then the other boys followed suit, so they started to kick and punch Robert as he was laying on the ground, mostly around his head area. As this attack occurred, a lot of the people that were around there ran off. You know, they didn't want to be part of this, so they just ran off. And also the level of violence shown in this attack really scared people, understandably, so they wanted to get out of there, get away from it. So when the boys' attack on Robert kind of slowed down a little bit, Sophie crouched down and cradled Robert's head in her arms, and this is when she was set upon by two boys, Brendan again and another boy called Ryan. The attack on Sophie, again, mostly focused mostly around her head area. She was kicked so violently that one of her, or some of her dreadlocks were actually ripped from her scalp, which is unbelievable. One of the girls that were there in the park that had spoken to Robert and Sophie earlier on in the evening phoned 999, and this was at 1:22 a.m. The police and paramedics arrived shortly after that. When the paramedics actually arrived, it is said that they actually struggled to tell the difference, you know, tell who was who between Sophie and Robert, because they were both beaten so badly. They were unrecognisable, so they were both rushed to hospital straight away. The next morning after the attack, Sophie's mum was actually out doing some shopping, and she came home to multiple missed calls and a note from the police saying call them urgently. So at that point she got the news that her daughter was badly beaten up and she was in intensive care in the local hospital. Sophie's mum rushed to the hospital to be by her daughter's side, and her description is heartbreaking. Her description of her daughter was awful. She said her head and kind of face area, everything was extremely swollen. She had trainer marks on her face where she had been stamped on, and patches of her hair were missing. They were where they had been ripped out during this attack. During the next couple of weeks, Robert's condition, he was in hospital as well, you know, in a really serious state, but his condition began to improve. You know, he was you know, able to start speaking, but Sophie was not so lucky. Her condition deteriorated, and on the 21st of August, 10 days after the attack, Sophie was taken for a scan to see if they could detect any kind of brain signals, and none could be found. There are quite a few documentaries on this crime, and there's one in particular that Sophie's mother talks about the attack and then the decision that she took to turn Sophie's life support off. It is absolutely harrowing. It's one of the most awful things I've watched. So if you are going to look for something like that, viewer discretion is advised. But Sophie's life support was turned off. Sophie passed away on the 24th of August 2007 at the age of 20 years old. During this time, when Sophie was in hospital and everything that was happening there, the police were doing their jobs, and through witnesses speaking up that night, they managed to find the names of the 5 boys that were involved in the attack on Robert and Sophie. 3 of them were arrested at home, and 2 of them actually handed themselves in to the police. They were all held in custody, but they were not talking. They wouldn't openly talk about the crime, and none of them were taking accountability for what they'd done. Once Sophie had passed away, the charges for the 5 boys were all upped. So on the 6th of September, they were changed from GBH, which is grievous bodily harm, and they were changed to intent, like murder with intent. This change actually got some of them singing like canaries. The boys that were not involved with the attack on Sophie started opening up and telling the police exactly what went down that evening. The police also gathered evidence, physical evidence, from the boys' houses, the clothes that they were wearing that evening, the shoes that they were wearing that night. Ryan, one of the main perpetrators, his jeans had blood stains all up the legs. His shoes had blood, embedded into the soles, which was caused because he'd stamped on Robert and Sophie's heads. Like, just absolutely awful. There were a couple of things that actually sealed the deal for Ryan in terms of his conviction. He had phoned his mum from custody and actually made a confession to her while he was on the phone. And the police ended up bugging the transportation van that Ryan and Brendan were getting into court, and Ryan was actually recorded saying that he kicked Sophie's head like a football. What an absolute douche canoe. So the trial was set for the 10th of March 2008, but before the trial got ahead, Ryan actually tried to have his charge of murder lowered to manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. He was actually saying that he was autistic. So the prosecution then got an expert in to test Ryan, and it was found that he wasn't autistic. So that was withdrawn and the case got underway. On the first day of the trial, Ryan pled guilty and admitted that he did indeed murder Sophie. So the case for Sophie's murder continued against Brendan, and on the 27th of March, he was actually found guilty of murder. There was not actually enough evidence on the other 3 boys for them to be charged with Sophie's murder, but they all got charged, they all pled guilty to GBH with intent for the attack of Robert. On the 28th of March, they were all due for sentencing. So Brendan got a life sentence with a minimum of 18 years. Ryan got a life sentence with a minimum of 16 years and 3 months, which he actually appealed, and he won his appeal. The judge agreed that his sentence should be reduced because he pled guilty. So his sentence got reduced by 9 months. I'll never understand why that kind of crap happens. The other 3 boys involved, they all got between 4 years and 6 years in prison. In early November, Robert left hospital. That was 3 months after the attack. His physical wounds had healed enough for him to go home, but he was still suffering so badly from the mental impact of this. What this attack did to him mentally is something that no one should ever have to understand. Sophie's funeral took place, and it was actually described as a lifting up experience, a celebration of her life. All of Sophie's friends brought a single flower, which they placed on the grave, like they left it on her grave. Her coffin was actually white, and all of Sophie's friends and family were encouraged to write messages to Sophie on this. So it was just a you know, a beautiful way to say goodbye to one of their friends and family. This crime really affected a lot of people. You know, these two innocent people, one of which had her life taken away from her, the other of which has lifelong scars from it. You know, it was unnecessary, and it happened just because they were different, just because they looked different. This had an effect, a huge media storm around it, and so much so that after Sophie's death, her mother set up this charity to try and eradicate discrimination against people from alternative subcultures. She was really passionate about this and talked beautifully about acceptance of everyone, no matter what they look like. And you know, she really did a lot for young people that were vulnerable as well. Sophie's mum, Sylvia, actually passed away on the 12th of April 2022. This case was such a shocking one at the time, and as I said at the beginning, it really affected me. I was similar age, and yeah, and went around in similar groups, I guess. It was a senseless attack that only happened because of the way that Sophie and Robert looked. I just want to thank you for watching this video, and hopefully you come again next week when I've got a different case to talk about. Thanks very much. Love you and leave you. Bye.